Welcome back to day 4 of PowerShell. The first 3 days, again, just a quick overview. We did an overview of PowerShell, what is PowerShell, then we went over variables, talked about the 5 different variable types, and then we went into operators to include mathematical operators, logical operators. Then we went over useful techniques, and then we dived right into flow control. We went over our if-else statements, and then we talked about switches. And then yesterday we went over loops, talked about our while loop, talked about a for loop, do while, do until, and then last of all we talked about the for each. And today we're going to go over functions and then basic PowerShell commands. PowerShell commands, you'll be watching a different video for that one. And then that will be all of the lecture for PowerShell. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. All right, like always at the beginning of the day, go ahead and let's do a rehash quiz over some of the other previous sections. Just make sure you know the material. Again, these questions will be on your oral exam. You need to get at least 8 out of 10 correctly to pass the block. Question number 1, what are the 5 different variable types? 5 different variable types should be bnash, boolean, number, array, string, hash table. Question number 2, what flow control will test multiple conditions only one time? If it's doing multiple conditions, but just does it once, we know it can't be a loop. It would have to either be if, else, or a switch. And since it's multiple conditions, that would be a switch. What flow control will test one condition only one time? That would be our if statement or if else statement. Question 4, what flow control can test one condition but multiple times? That would be any type of loop. Question 5, what is one way that a loop will create an infinite loop? Probably one of the easiest ways for this one would just be if you forgot to change or modify the variable that is inside your conditional statement. So if it's true once and you don't change it, it's always going to be true and it never escapes the loop, resulting in an infinite loop. Question 6, if both statements are true in an XOR, what will the output be? Again, exclusive OR is one or the other, but not both. So if both are, it would be false. Question 7, why do I not need to check the second statement in an OR if the first one is true? Well, an OR just needs one or the other to be true to result in true. So if the first one is true, the second one, it really doesn't even matter if it's true or false. It's still going to result in true because it just needs that one. And if the first one's true, the second one could still be false and it would still result in true. Question number 8, why do I not need to check the second statement and if the first one is false? So this is very similar to the other one except kind of in reverse. So and needs both to be true. So if the first one's false, it doesn't matter if that second one is true or false because both of them need to be true. If one of them is false already, we already know the end result will automatically be false. Question number 9, what are the 3 parts included in the for loops parentheses? So inside your parentheses in the for loops, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to initialize your variable, which will be your variable initialization. The second thing is going to be your conditional statement. And then the last thing is going to be your variable modification, such as an increment or decrement of your variable. Last question, question number 10, what loop will always run the block of code at least one time? And for this one, I'll take one of 2 answers. You could either say a do while or a do until. All right, that's it for the quiz. So let's go ahead and dive on into our subject for today, which is functions. So again, first of all, we'll go over the overview of function, why we use functions, what are functions used for. Then we'll go ahead and talk about built-in functions for PowerShell. Then we'll go ahead and discuss creating user functions. It's just functions that we want to use for ourselves. We'll talk about how to call a function, function parameters, returning a value from a function, and then we'll go over scope, which is mainly talking about variable scope, but it's within functions and outside of functions. And last of all, we'll go over some exercises. So you might be wondering, why do we even have a function? What is a function? All right, so really a function in PowerShell, or really in any code, is just a grouping of code, and it's going to have an optional input and it's going to have an optional output. but really it's just a grouping of code. All right. And a lot of times, if we want, I mean, just like any function, right? If we want it to do something, right, but we don't have to type the same code over and over again, we can create a function and it will do that said function, but we only have to create it once. All right. So for example, if we want to create a function, maybe like this function, for example, will find the perimeter of a circle if it's given a radius, right? So you only have to create the function once, and then you can call that function as many times as you want. So again, it's just a way of it's collecting a bunch of code to perform once, or you can do it multiple times by just pointing to it instead of duplicating that code repeatedly, right? So if I want to create a function that, you know, that you give it the radius, it outputs the circumference. I wouldn't have to do that multiple times. I just create it once, and then I call it, and I call it again for every time I want that function to run. The cool thing also about functions is if you make a mistake in a function, you only have to correct that mistake once inside that function, right? Whereas if you were to like copy and paste multiple code and you didn't create a function, you just like, you know, just copied and pasted it like 10 different times, you would have to go and correct each mistake 10 different times because you repeated that mistake over the entire time. Whereas if you create a function, you only have to type it out once, and if you do make a mistake, you know exactly where that mistake would be at, and you don't have to like go and find it, you know, 10 different times. Again, so when writing for while loops and if else statements into a function, you can call them whenever you need to without rewriting them. So again, it saves you a lot of time, saves you headaches. And then the last one we kind of already went over. If you need to correct a mistake in the function, it's easier to find and only need to correct the mistake one time instead of correcting that mistake multiple times wherever you copied and pasted that code. And really, whenever you have functions too, a lot of times you'll see like a main function, and then you have smaller functions. So usually you'll have inside your program, you'll have one main function, right? And then inside of that main function, you'll be calling different other functions, right? And usually those functions are a little bit smaller functions. It's like, hey, this function does this function does that. So for example, if you have like a game function, you would have a main function, and then inside the game function, you would have like maybe a start game, and then maybe the boss level, and then maybe a credits function, and then you'd have a high score function, and then a quick game function, you know, something like that, where there's multiple functions within each of it, right? And then you'd have one main function overall that kind of runs the entire game. So for user-defined function, again, there are main functions that PowerShell already has written, and then there's user-defined functions. So those are the ones that we want to create that PowerShell doesn't already have. So again, user-defined functions. If you need a function PowerShell doesn't have, you can write these functions on your own. So when creating user-defined functions, you'll need to both declare the function, and then later on in the code, you have to call the function to make it run. So an important note, you only need to declare a function one at a time. Sorry, you only need to declare a function one time, right? So you declare it right at the top, but then you can call that function, which means you're running that function, like you're using that function as many times as you want. So you declare it or initialize that function at the top, and then you can use it multiple times throughout your code. All right, for declaring or creating functions, pretty much the same thing. There are a certain syntax that you'll need. So we'll go ahead and do the components of it. So first of all, you'll have your function keyword, right, which is just function. Then you'll create whatever name you want for that function. In this case, our function name is write seconds per day. You'll have your start and your end curly bracket. All right, and then your code statements in between that. So this is declaring your function, right? So you'll have the keyword function, the name of the function, and then what that function does. And then later on in your code, whenever you're calling your function, right, the only thing that you need is just the name of the function, and it will go ahead and it'll say, oh, hey, this is that function that was defined earlier. It will go ahead and it'll run through it, and then it'll be done. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of figure out what this function does. All right, so this function is write seconds per day. So it's going to go whenever you call that function, which is later on after you've initialized it. All right, so we're going to go and call it. It's going to come up here. It's going to save 24 to the variable hours. Then it's going to take hours, which in this case is 24. It's going to multiply by 60, save that into minutes. All right, then it's going to take this minutes, which should be whatever 24 times 60 is, multiply that by 60, and then save it into the variable seconds. And then it's just going to return seconds. And when we say return seconds, it just returns it down here, and then it'll display it to the screen. All right, so when we call this function, it'll run it, and then eventually it'll return it down here, whatever this is, which is 24 times 60 times 60, and then it'll go ahead and print that out to the screen. All right, so exercise. So I want you to go ahead, pause the video, and go ahead and see if you can write a function that prints your name. So again, it should be a fairly simple function, right? So really just kind of practicing the syntax of functions, right? It shouldn't be anything too tricky, but I want you to go and pause it, write a function that prints your name, and then I'll go ahead and show you how I would do it. All right, now we are going to dive right into functions. The first function that we're going to do is going to be fairly simple. It's just a function that prints out your name. All right, so it should be pretty easy overall. Again, we're just kind of trying to get the syntax down for now. Before I do anything, we'll go ahead and do CLS at the top, like always. And then I will go ahead and do my comment block. And then go and put my name. Go and put the date. And then a title. Function that prints out our name. All right. So again, this should be a pretty simple pretty simple function that we're going to go ahead and attack. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So we can go ahead and do Control J. We can do function. All right. So again, this is the function keyword. We have my function, which is the name of it, and then we have these param1, param2. So I wouldn't worry quite a bit about this one yet. All right, so we'll get to that in a little bit with parameters, and then we have our code block down here. So every time before I have a function, I always, anytime I initialize in that function, I'm going to go ahead and do a code block, and it's good practice. And I like to see you guys also do this, where you have a code block, and then you're kind of describing what that function is. All right. You should kind of figure out, okay, what is the input? What is the output? What is it doing? Just to kind of give everyone a good idea of what that function does. All right, what's the function of that function? So the first thing that you could go ahead and do is just kind of do a short, a description of the function. All right, so ours is very simple. So this function will print out my name. So again, we would have kind of like, we could have inputs, which this is kind of like saying parameters. And in this case, for ours, we don't really need anything. So there is no input. The output, so what should we expect to come out of the function? It would just be printing our name to the screen. All right. And that's pretty much it. I mean, this is a very, very basic function, so you don't have to have a whole lot of stuff in that comment block. So function, my function, let's go ahead and change this to actually make sense. So, print name. we can go ahead as our function. And then the one thing that we would really need to do, let's go ahead and make it a little bit interesting. We're actually going to ask the user, hey, what is your name? And then we can go ahead and print that. All right. So again, if we're going to ask them, what is your name? We can go ahead and do our read host. Please enter your name. And then we're going to go ahead and write to the screen. Your name is, name. And that is all we would really need to do. All right, so let's go ahead and run it. And notice you see nothing happens. All right. And I'm kind of expecting, I'm like, well, why is nothing happening? It should be asking, right? I did read host, please enter your name. Why is it not doing anything? And that's because we've initialized the function, right? We've initialized it. This is initializing it, but we've never called it. So again, I can call it down here, all right? So I can go ahead and do print name, and then it'll run, all right? Please enter your name. Your name is Jared, boom, it's done. Or what I can actually do is I can call it down here, or I could call it right here. Oh. All right, print name. So if I call it in here, it'll go ahead and read through what the function does. Then this is where I call the function. So then it comes up here and actually runs it. Now you can initialize your function all day long and try to run it, but unless you actually call it, it's not actually going to do anything. The computer will know what that function does, but if you don't call it, you're not using that function, if that makes sense. So if we go ahead and run it again, enter your name is Bob. All right, hope that makes sense. All right, now we just printed out our name using functions, right? My name, print name. So now we're going to talk about calling function, which we actually just talked about just a second ago. So again, calling the function is the most simplest thing that you can do. All you need to do is write the function name, right? So you'd go ahead and go to your own line, line all by itself. Then you go ahead and actually just write out the name of that function, and then that is calling it, which is actually going to make that function run. So again, here is your function get name. Name equals read host, please enter your name, right? You enter the name of that. And then actually running the function is right here. So get name will actually run this function. This part is just initializing it. This part is actually running it. And this part is called calling the function. So again, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But again, a lot of times we'll forget to actually call it. And then we'll be like, hey, why isn't my function working? It's because you never called it. All right, now we're going to go ahead and get into parameters. So again, parameters all they are just variables that you can pass to a function. So parameters are going to be used inside of a function, right? So a lot of times you want to pass, and when I say pass, it's kind of like using the input. So you're going to input some variables or input some numbers into a function, and those parameters is what takes in those values, right? So parameters, all they are just variables that are used inside of a function. So when you declare the function and the declaration of the function, parameters are added to the end of the function name inside of parentheses and comma separated. So again, we have our function, we have the name of the function, and then right here inside your parentheses after the name of the function is where you have your parameters. A lot of times for me, I'll just use parameter 1, parameter 2, parameter 3, just to make it fairly simple. You can use whatever name you want to call them. All right. So again, parameters are added to the end of the function inside the parentheses. And again, they're going to be comma separated in here. When the function is being called, parameters are space separated after the function name, no parentheses, no commas. Now this is very, very important because when you call them, like right here, I am passing the value 5. 5 goes up, and then number, which is a parameter, takes on this value. So then it would be 5 plus 1, it would return 6. This next one that I'm calling, add 1 to this, I'm passing 101. 101 becomes number, and then number plus 1 becomes 102, and then prints out. So this is what you should get after running this function. Notice this is the parameter, all right, and this is what I'm passing. So I can pass a number, I could pass a variable, it really doesn't matter. If I had more than one parameter, like right here, I just have one parameter, right? If I had more than one parameter, I would need to comma separate them up here. Down here, I would have them space separate. So just separate by space, like 5, space, 10, whatever. All right. So now let's go ahead and write a function that divides a number by 2. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, now we're going to go ahead and write a function that divides any number, right, by 2. So let's go ahead. We're going to go ahead and create a function. But before we create any function, I go ahead and make sure that we have that comment block. So, you know, what is the function? What does it do? What is its purpose? And I also want to do CLS at the top. All right, so let's go ahead and do so the description. This is a function that will take in any number and then output the number divided by 2. All right, so it needs some input, right? So your input is going to be the parameters that you're going to need. So input, we need one number. All right, so input one number, and it really doesn't matter. We could just say integer. All right, one number integer. The parameter that we're going to call, we'll just call it parameter 1. I'll say param1, and then we want this to be an int, and then the output, all right, is also going to be an int, and it's the number number divided by 2. All right, so let's go ahead and do the function keyword, right? And we're going to say the function name. Let's say just say, let's spell it right, divided by 2. And we're going to take in one parameter. I'm going to say param1. All right, so this is the function, right? This is the name of it, and it's going to accept one parameter. In this case, we want this to be an integer. So we're going to go ahead and take that in. All we're going to do is just divide it by 2. So we're going to take whatever number they give us, which in this case will be our parameter, parameter 1, and we're just going to divide that number, right, by 2. And that's pretty much it. Like, it doesn't have to be super, super complicated. All right, so anytime we call that function, of course, we need to call the, all right, we need to call the name of it, and then we need to pass something to it. So again, we can pass it a variable, we can pass it a number. Let's just go and just pass it 10. So again, this is our output. It goes into here, and then we're going to use this throughout. Now, the cool thing is I can call this, you know, as much as I want. And I can pass it 10, I can pass it 46, I can pass it, let's do an odd number, 23, let's see what happens. All right, so again, I'm running this function, right, 3 times. The first time I run it, I'm passing it 10, parameter 1 becomes 10, it should output 5. So again, it's probably good to go ahead and actually kind of put what you would expect as output, just to kind of check yourself. So output expected to be 5. All right. And then we can say output expected to be 23. And then last one, output expected to be, let me go round up. So let's go ahead and do 12. All right. Actually, you know what? It probably won't, because we didn't force it, so it'll probably be 1.5. All right, so let's go ahead and run it. Let's see what happens. All right, All right, so we got 5, 23, 11.5. Everything ran perfectly. It got exactly what we thought we would get down here. So it looks like we are good to go. So let's go ahead and go on to the next section. All right, now let's go ahead and jump into functions that have multiple parameters. So again, functions that have multiple parameters means multiple inputs. So they require more than just the one number. Like so when we did number divided by 2, we just asked for one number, and then we divided that number by 2, and then we outputted just that answer. For some functions, they're going to require that they want more information. So for example, this one, in this example, function itinerary, it looks like there's actually 3 different inputs that we need from the either from the user or from someone. So we need 3 different inputs to fill in these 3 different parameters. All right. So if we look at it, we have this function itinerary. It's wanting a variable A, variable B, variable C. So 3 different informations. And then we're going to plug those into these 3 different write statements. So I plan to go to work at whatever variable A is, AM. I plan to eat lunch at B. I plan to sleep at C, PM. So it looks like this again is the function declaration, and this is where we're calling the function. So the first time we call the function, we're calling it and we're passing it 3 different numbers. Notice these parameters, A, B, and C, are all separated by commas, but when we call them, it's just space separated. Because again, if we put commas down here, it's going to assume that this is just one big array, and we're passing that array to the first one. So again, when you call a function, there should be no commas here. So for example, itinerary 6, 12, and 9 is going to print out this part. So I plan to go work at 6 a.m. I plan to eat lunch at 12. I plan to go to sleep at 9 p.m. Again, it doesn't really matter if you do integers or strings. It'll just go and plug it in like so. All right. Now, if we went ahead and did the same thing, except we did 6, 12, and 9, and we passed it, we've already talked about that, where that would be an array, and what would happen is it would say, I plan to go to work at 6, 12, 9 a.m. And then these next 2 would actually be blank. All right. So let's go ahead and actually just do this quick example just to go ahead and show you what happens, how it happens, and just to make sure that we confirm how we do functions with multiple parameters. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with functions dealing with multiple parameters. So the first thing I do is I always do CLS, and then let's go ahead and do a comment block, and then we're going to do a comment block for our function itself. Go ahead and give a description. So this function has, let's see here, multiple parameters that deals with my itinerary. All right, so we're going to have 3 parameters that are all integers. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So Control J, function. We're going to call it itinerary. And then we're going to actually add one more parameter in there. So I'm just going to keep it the param1, param2, and just add a param3. And notice, again, in this, notice these are all comma separated, which is what we want. All right, so we're going to have 3 write statements. You know, I plan to get up at, we're going to do param1, AM. And then we're going to go ahead so get up, I plan to get up, eat, and then sleep. All right. So we have the function. The function name is called itinerary. It's going to accept 3 different parameters. And then we want to change these to parameter 1, parameter 2, and parameter 3. So whenever I call itinerary, let's say I get up at 6. I get up at, or I eat at noon. And I sleep at 9. All right. So let's go ahead and run it. And then, so it's 6, 12, and 9. So it should be, I plan to get up at 6 a.m., plan to eat at 12 p.m., I plan to sleep at 9 p.m. All right, so far that looks good. Again, we use space separated down here. That's the biggest thing with multiple parameters. When you declare them up here, you do commas, but whenever you call them, you don't. Now, most experienced programmers are going to get a little bit confused because they're used to actually putting commas down here. So you just have to be really careful, especially if you're a more experienced programmer, to not forget that part. So again, I can also do the 6, noon, and 9, and that should still give me the same, 6 a.m., noon, at 9 p.m. So again, everything is fine. The only issue is whenever we actually use the commas down here. So let's go ahead and show you what exactly would happen if I did that. And notice I plan to get up at 6, 12, 9 a.m. and then these are left blank. So what happens is PowerShell reads this actually as an array, and because it's an array, it just throws this into the first parameter. So 6, 12, and 9, it throws into parameter 1, and then nothing is left over for parameter 2 and parameter 3. So again, that's why it's very important. Anytime you're passing parameters and you have multiple parameters, you just want to put space separated so that this will go to the first one, the second one will go to the second parameter, the third one will go to the third parameter. All right, so returning information. Again, PowerShell is a little bit different also on returning. So a lot of times you don't even necessarily need the return keyword. I know if you're an experienced programmer with other different languages, a lot of times they want the return keyword. In PowerShell, you just need the variable on a line by itself, and that will automatically return that variable to the rest of the code and print it out or do whatever. So just an important thing, any variable on its own line will be returned by the function. If you have more than one variable returned, it will return it as a single array with all the variables inside. So for example, in this one, all right, so we have this function declaration. What color flag is the name? And then it's wanting at least one input, and then they're going to use the parameter called temp. And then inside your function, you have a switch statement. It's accepting whatever this temp is, right? I'm guessing temperature. So again, it's going to, whatever we put in there, if it's less than A1.9, it's going to be white. If it's less than A4.9, it's going to be green. Less than A7.9, it's going to be yellow. Less than A9.9, it's going to be red. And the default, if it's none of those, it's going to be black. However, the issue with this is, let's say it's, because the switch, remember, it'll go through every single one. So if it's like 70, it's actually going to say white, green, yellow, and red, right? So if 83.2 is actually going to be green, yellow, and red, right? If we actually would run this. So this you'd have to be careful. So you'd actually, in this case, you'd want the return keyword if you want just one of those colors. All right, and the return in this point, the return keyword in PowerShell would actually stop that function from running, and it would just go back. So if you want, for example, if you want to use a return keyword, you can, but just realize anytime you use the return keyword, it's going to stop the function from any additional execution. So in this case, you would want it to actually return, because you wouldn't want it to do, green, yellow, and red. You just want green. So then you'd want the return keyword in there. All right. Most of the time I don't use the return keyword unless I have like something like this. I mean, usually for the most part, I would just have the whatever value or whatever variable I want returned just on a line by itself. All right, now an important thing about testing functions. So it's super, super important to be able to test your functions. And a lot of times what happens is if you have like more than one function going on at a time, you want to test each function individually. So you want to like go in there, what do I expect, right? So you want to have like these, when you're testing your functions, you want to know what you expect for the input and what you expect for the output. So you're going to like do test functions, you're going to do test parameters that you're going to like pass into the function, and then just making sure it runs as expected, right? And then before you actually connect a lot of different functions together, you want to make sure each function is working individually. And then once all the functions have been verified that they're working individually, then and only then do you want to actually put them together and make sure that the whole program itself runs correctly. All right, so this is kind of showing you right here is you're actually commenting out this, because this is actually calling the next function, divide by 4. And really, we don't want to do that. What we want to do is make sure that this build array function works perfectly, and then this function works perfectly, and then we can go ahead and uncomment this out and actually go from this function to this function. So again, it's important that you test out each individual function by themselves. All right, and that's pretty much what this slide is trying. So again, you have this test array. You're going to throw in, something that should work, and then make sure you get the expected result back. Some troubleshooting, especially just kind of some general rules. Read your code. Make sure that you understand what that code is saying. As you're going through your code, if you get errors, right, it's going to tell you a lot of information. Just make sure you go through those error messages, see where the error is at, where it's underlined, what's going on. Make sure your syntax matters. Spelling, I don't know how many times I've seen students misspell variables, misspell functions. Just go through all of your variables, just make sure there's no spelling errors. And again, make sure your syntax is right. And this is going to help you greatly if you are able to stay organized, and also with your indentation and also your curly brackets, if they all line up right underneath that key function word. Because just believe me, if you're not consistent with how you're doing your programming, it's gonna get all crazy. Also, another important thing, so like right here, disconnecting your function. So make sure each function runs independent and actually is what you expect to get. And then also, some great thing, insert test statements, right? So see what the variable is that you think it should be, because sometimes you think it should be this and it's not. So, actually say, okay, what is this variable? Or you can do, what is this variable type? So .get type. I would do a lot of those things if I'm not getting what I expect. All right. So again, we have this function here, right? Get times result A and B. C is equal to A times B, and then we're just going to output C. So what do you think the result should be for this? All right, we're passing 6 and 7. 6 goes to parameter A, 7 goes to parameter B. 6 times 7, if you said 42, then you would be correct. All right, now for scope. Actually, before we get into scope, I want to go ahead and do a couple practices of the functions just to show you how some functions connect and then how to do some troubleshooting. All right, so let's go ahead and do a couple different functions all together. And let's see how we connect them. So I'm going to go ahead and do CLS at the top just to make the output look nice and pretty and clean. And then I'm going to go ahead and do 2 comment blocks. All right, now here we go. All right, so we're going to have one function, right, that is going to feed into another function. So for example, we'll have one function, let's say that asks for your name and then asks for your age. And then that is going to feed into the next function. And let's say it's a switch, right? And then it's going to tell you based on your age, you know, what are you? All right. So let's go ahead and work on the first function. So this function, go and do the description first. All right. So this function will ask your name and your age, then pass your age to the next function. All right. Inputs none, parameters none, and then output. Really the only thing output is it just passes the age to the next function to be used. So this function, so we'll use the age from the previous function to determine what age group you're in. Parameters, we're going to have one parameter. That's going to be an integer. Output, it will age group you associated with. Okay. All right, so let's go and do it. So we're going to do function. This is get name age function. And again, this one doesn't need any parameters. So we go and get rid of that. And all it is getting your name. So we're going to go ahead and get name. We're going to use our read host. Please enter your name. And then we're going to get your age. We're going to force that to be an int. And then we're going to go ahead and call the next function. So again, inside, we're going to go ahead and call the next function inside this. Now we haven't created the function yet, so let's go ahead and create the function so we know what we're going to call it. All right, so function, let's say age group. It accepts one parameter. All right, so we're going to call it parameter 1. And then it's going to be a switch, so I'm going to go ahead and do Control J. Switch, and it's going to be parameter 1 that we're dealing with. Let's just say we have, I don't know, 3 different groups and then a default. So let's say parameter 1, if they're less than 13, we'll go ahead and write you are young. If they're less than 36. Let's just go with less than 40. You are middle-aged. And I'm going to go ahead and hit break after each of these. And if it's none of those, then we're going to write you're just old. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is go on up here. We're going to call this function. So we're going to call age group at the end, and we're going to pass it the age. So what's going to happen here is we're going to run get name age. It's going to get the name. It's going to get our age. And then at the end of this function, it's going to call age group. And it's going to pass the age that whatever the user entered. And age will become parameter 1. And then down here, parameter 1, which is our age, will determine what is out of here. All right. Now, before we actually run both of these together, what I was saying is it's important to kind of run each of them individually. So I don't want to call this one yet, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to comment out this line. All right. And then what I want to do is just kind of go ahead and see if it worked. So I'm going to print out name, print out age after I enter them. And then just to see, hey, did it actually work? So I'm going to go ahead and run both of these, right? And then I'm actually going to call get name age, see if it works. So I'm going to do get name age. All right, so name, Jared, 34 age. So did it print out? Yep, so it looked like it worked. Again, this is a pretty simple one, right? So there couldn't be anything too crazy going on here. But it looks like this one worked. Now, I'm going to go ahead and run age group. But again, in this one, I have to pass something to it, right? So I'm going to go ahead, without running the first one, I'm just going to run the second one, but I have to pass something to it, right? Because function age group requires some input. So I'm going to go ahead and call age group, and let's say I'm going to go ahead and pass it 10, and I should expect you are young. Perfect. Now I'm going to call it again. I'm going to do 14. All right, middle age, that's correct. I'm not sure if that's actually right, but anyways. Then I'm going to go ahead and do 44. We're getting up there, perfect. And then 61. All right, perfect. So now that looks like both functions are working correctly. Now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to delete these two things because those were good to go. And I'm going to uncomment out here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run get name age. Right, and then that should call age group, and then it should give me both. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do get name age, Jared, and let's say I'm 35. All right, so oh, yep. Okay, so it was going off of the previous function because I need to make sure I hit run again to actually run the new function. So let me go ahead and do that one more time. Get name age. All right, now this one should work now because it was still going off that last function because it didn't run the changes. Enter name, or sorry, enter age. All right, middle-aged. Perfect. So again, this shows you, all right, how you can go from one function to another function. And again, you can call one function inside of the other function to get to the other function and then pass in parameters. But then also it's important to make sure that you are working on each function individually. All right, make sure that they're good individually before you kind of put them together. All right. All right, now I want to go ahead and dive into scope. So scope can be a little bit tricky, so I want to try to make it as easy and as simple as possible. So a variable in a function can only exist within that function if it is called. All right, so it's called local scope, like it's the function, the scope of that function. So when we talk about scope, we're talking about where that variable lives, who can access that variable, and then what section it can be accessed. For example, if a variable is created within a function, it is born and then it kind of dies within that function. So if you try to call a function, if you try to call a variable outside of the function, it's not going to realize what variable you're talking about. So scope is who can access that variable, who knows about that variable, does that variable even exist outside of that. So scope is pretty much how who knows about that variable. So again, and it's always at the lowest level. So if a variable is created inside a function, it's only going to be known inside that function. If a variable is made inside a script, then it'll be known within that entire script. If a global variable, if you force something to be a global variable, then it will be known in all the scripts. All right, which is each individual tab. So the biggest thing is just making sure that you realize anytime you create a variable inside a function, it's only going to be survivable inside that function. If you create it outside of the function, then it should have script level scope. All right, that just goes to say it's really important that if you're creating variables inside functions, realizing that won't last for very long. All right. Some bonus nerd data. So again, there are different levels of scope. There's local, there's script, there's global. To actually define some of these, we can go ahead and do like $global, $script, colon, and then the variable name is actually test. So script level test equals 1. These are how you would define each of these different levels of scope. All right, again, this is a little bit bonus nerd data, but B and D. All right, so for some exercises here, the first one, it says write a script with a function that prints out hello world. Write a script that uses a function to evaluate if a given number is odd or even, then returns the result. Take any of the 3 exercises from the flow control lessons and turn them into function. So again, go ahead and work on those. Those shouldn't be too bad. Pretty much it's just making things that we've done before and putting those into functions. So overall, we talked about functions, why we use functions, built-in functions, creating and using functions, how to call a function, talk about function parameters, returning a value, and then lastly we talked about scope, and then we went through some exercises. So again, I'm going to go ahead and do just 1 or 2 more functions that deal with scope, and then we'll be done with this part, and then we'll go into user-defined functions, or PowerShell defined functions and commands in the next section. All right, so I want to kind of show you a little bit of scope as it deals with like local scope, function level scope, script level scope, and all that. All right, so I want to go ahead and give you an example of scope. So for example, if I have a variable, let's just say variable A, and we're going to say that's equal to 5. All right, and then I have a function. All right, let's call this my function. We're going to print out variable A, and then we're going to go ahead and change variable A to 6, and then we're going to say A is now, all right, and we're going to go and call my function, and then we're going to write A at the very end is variable A. All right, now, if we didn't have to worry about scope, what would happen? All right, so let's go ahead and just run through and kind of figure out, okay, what should we get, and then what do we get, all right? So we come down here, line 3, it makes variable A equal to 5. Okay, then it's going to read this. It's not going to do anything until it runs it, right? And then it runs it down here, so it's going to come up here. It should print out 5. So the first thing that we print out is 5. Then we rewrite this variable A to be 6. So the first thing it prints out is 5, and then it should say A is now 6. And then it's going to come down here, right? And you would think we just changed this to 6, so A at the very end, you would think would say is 6. So we should say 5, A is now 6, A at the very end is 6. However, that's where you would be wrong, because this function is different scope, right, than this one right here. So first it's 5, we change it to 6, but again, any changes in here are not going to be affected on the outside. So when you run it, it'll actually say 5, A is now 6, A at the very end is 5. So let's go and run it just to make sure. So we should get 5, 6, 5, right? But you would think, well, we changed it to 6. So why in the world did it change back? It's because this is only the function local scope, right? This is script level. Now, if I want to make changes and actually have them affected, what I can do is I can come in here and I can actually just say script to make it script level scope. So script A, so this will actually change it so that this effect is actually script affected out here too, not just inside the function. All right, so let's go and run it. So now what do we know? So we know 5, A is now 6, and A at the very end is 6. So you can make changes if you force it to be a higher scope. But if you don't, if you're just going to say, hey, this is just regular function scope, then it's not going to make any effects on the outside. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Just be really careful. I never have variables here that also have the same variable name on the outside, because you're going to get yourself all confused. All right, so the biggest thing is just make sure that you realize anytime you're creating the variable on the inside of a function, it's not the same thing as the variable on the outside of the function. All right, well, welcome to the last section of PowerShell. So I'm going to go ahead and go through this section fairly quickly, but I will have some other videos that I want you to go ahead and go through that go a little bit more in depth into PowerShell commands, dealing especially with like admin things. So I'll go ahead and go through this fairly quick, but again, there's going to be some more videos that I want you to go ahead and go through that deal with some of the more PowerShell commandlets. All right, so let's go and dive right into it. So again, today we're going to talk about the overview of PowerShell commands, commandlets, wide script PowerShell commands, some informational commands, program interaction, some user commands, and some help commands. So again, talk about built-in functions. So before we were talking about user-defined functions. Those are the ones that we actually defined ourselves. But PowerShell actually has thousands of built-in functions already. So again, we've already used some of the built-in functions such as get variable, get random, get date. And again, there's thousands of more. One of the cool things that you can go ahead and do on your own, so go ahead and pause this, type get variable, get random, and enter. So just kind of see what it does. And those are a pretty cool one. I like the get random one because it'll give you a random function. You can actually, after get random, you can give it a list of numbers or an array, and it'll actually get a random number from the array that you provided, which is kind of cool. So again, kind of take a minute or two, kind of go over a couple different functions, and then come back. One of the important reasons is why do we even script PowerShell commands? So again, PowerShell is fully integrated into almost all Windows functions. Again, which creates an opportunity to include PowerShell commands into our scripts to automate and speed up many tasks. So again, in this course, we cover a few basic PowerShell commands, but we're going to give you some other videos where you can learn some more about some other different PowerShell commands. Some just tips, some common sense things with PowerShell commands. So again, they're always a verb-noun, so we talked about that before. Most PowerShell commands, they're called commandlets, and they start with a verb and they end with a noun. All right. So for example, get-content, new-service, find-command, show-event log, read-host. All of those are in the same verb-noun format. And again, aliases, we've talked about those. Those are just kind of a nickname for a command, a shortcut. So again, get service, GSV. Get content, GC. Stop process, SPPS. Again, here's some basic informational commands. So if you want to go ahead and pause it, kind of go through some of these. I like the start sleep command at the bottom. So again, it kind of pauses execution for a set amount of time. So if you're doing a game and you want this screen if you want to like print some write statements onto the screen, pause it for 10 seconds and then clear the screen, you can use that start sleep function, which is pretty cool. And again, there's a lot of commands. We've talked about probably about half of these, but then there's also half that you can kind of go ahead and look further into. And again, a good thing to do is to type get help space and then whatever command you want to know more on. And then we have interacting with different programs commands. So we have get process, we have stop process. So those are two different commands where you can actually either display all the current running processes on a computer system or stop the process that you want. So for example, if Internet Explorer is running and you want to stop the process, you can just hit stop dash process, name IE Explorer. And again, go ahead and kind of mess around with that for a little while if you'd like. So if you want to, go ahead and go through some of these exercises. So open PowerShell, start calc.exe, notepad.exe. All you'd have to do is actually just type in calc.exe and notepad.exe, and PowerShell will actually bring those two different processes up. And again, you can use the stop process command. So that's pretty easy. SPPS, and then do space, tech name, and then whatever name you want to shut down. And you can go ahead and do those on your own. And here's some user commands. Again, to perform these functions, you have to actually have elevated privileges. So if you're trying to do this on an AppNet machine, it's not going to let you, which is good, because especially anyone that's new should not have a lot of these admin rights to do whatever they want. But again, these are some commands that would be good to know if you're going to be a system admin or anything like that. So how to remove a local user, rename, how to create a new user, and so on and so forth. And then here's some commands for the Mac operating system. All right, the help command. So the help command will pull up a lot of useful information on the command line. So again, get help and then whatever command you want help with. Usually what I will do is I'll either do TAC examples at the end, and that'll give you a lot of examples. Or TAC full, and that gives you pretty much the full help. Also, I do TAC online, which I really enjoy quite a bit, and it'll bring up the help pages, the Microsoft help pages online, and I can just kind of scroll through those and look for whatever I need. All right, and this we talked about the get child item from before, but this is an example of that. And here is an exercise that you can do. So again, create an array with 100 numbers in it. Have them store that array in a text file called 100numbers.txt. And then go ahead and type in this line verbatim, gc 100numbers.txt, total count 10. And again, that should give you the first 10 lines of that text file. And then the next exercise is get content, and this gives you the last 10 lines of a certain text file. And you would use this tactel 10. All right. And again, this is pretty much it. I want to go over it fairly quickly. I'm going to go ahead and give you the other videos to watch go a lot further in depth with the PowerShell commands. But in summary, we talked about why script PowerShell commands, some informational commands, program interaction, user commands, and help commands. We'll go ahead and go through this brain teaser together. So I'll go ahead and do that one with you. But it's talking about creating a function that evaluates a number. If that number is even, divided by 2. If that number is odd, multiplies by 3. And then adds 1. And then it would repeat until that number hits 1. All right, so we'll go ahead and do that. And then just lastly, here's one and a couple different ones. And then go ahead and read these articles for day 5. All right, so we'll go ahead and do this brain teaser, and then I'll go ahead and show you that. And then we are going to be done with my portion of the lecture. So I hope you enjoyed. All right, so we're going to do one more function. This is going to be our last function that we write. And then so I'm going to go ahead and do it function. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and CLS. And then go ahead and do my comment block. All right, so the description function takes a number if even, divide by 2 if odd, multiply by 3, and add 1 until number becomes 1. All right, this will need to include a loop in it, and then let's go and have it need a parameter. So one parameter, and we'll need it to be an integer. All right, so let's go and do it. Function. We'll call it fun math problem. All right, and then it's going to accept one parameter. All right, so it's going to be accepting a parameter, whatever that number is, and then we're going to be doing things on it. So ultimately, we got to think about ourselves, okay, what is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to take in a number, to check some things in it, and each time we're checking, we're going to see if it's even or if it's odd, and then if it is, we're going to do a certain thing, and then we're going to check to see, hey, is it 1 yet? Is it 1 yet? Is it 1 yet? So ultimately, in the loop, we're going to do this until, right, until that number becomes 1. So I'm going to use a do until. That's one of my favorite loops. So I'm going to go ahead and do Control J, do my do until, and pretty much I'm going to do it until that param1 is equal to 1. So I'm going to continue to do, either divided by 2 or multiply by 3 and then 1 until that number, which is in this case our parameter, is equal to 1. So the first thing that inside we're going to do is we're going to get that parameter from the outside, right? We're going to pass that in there, and then we're going to do some math on it until it becomes 1. So, but again, before we even do that, we need to check, hey, is it even or is it odd? So again, we're going to have our if else. So Control J, if. I'm going to go ahead and do an if else because it either is even or it's odd. So again, if param1, determine if it's even or odd, you do mod 2. If it's equal to 0, that means it is even, correct? So parameter 1 divided by 2, if the remainder is equal to 0, that's even. So if it's even, we're going to divide that number by 2. So again, I want to take param1, and I'm going to actually set it equal to, or actually I can just do divide equals 2. All right, that's the same thing as saying equals param1 divided by 2. All right, direct divide equals. All right, so it's going to set that equal to it, but then I want to go ahead and actually print it out. So after I divide it by 2, I still want to go ahead and print it out by 2. If it's not even, that would mean it's odd. So I'm going to else, I'm going to multiply by 3 and then add 1. So I'm going to take param1. I'm going to set it equal to parameter 1 times 3 plus 1. And then I still want to print it out just to kind of make sure it's doing what I think it's doing. And I'm going to do that until parameter 1 equals 1. So it should continue to loop, 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 loop until eventually it gets whittled down to 1, and then I should be done. So I'm going to go ahead and call it. What did I do? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and call this function, and then I'm going to pass in some number. So fun math problem, and let's pass it 34. All right, let's go ahead and see if this problem works. So again, I'm going to go ahead and run it. I'm passing it fun math problem 34. And let's go ahead and open this up, see what we got. All right, 34. So the first thing it does is it tests, is it even or is it odd? 34 is even, so it divides by 2, we get 17. 17 is odd. Multiply by 3, 51 plus 1, 52. So it looks like it's doing good. This is evens to 26. 26 is even, divide by 2, 13. 13 is odd. Multiply by 3 plus 1 is 40. 40 is even to 20, divide by 2, divide by 2. Odd times 3 plus 1, 16. Divide by 2, divide by 2. Because it's even, divide by 2, divide by 1. Divide by 2, and you get 1. And then it escapes. So excellent. So it looks like it worked perfectly. Hopefully you were able to get that again on your own. Again, if you didn't do that, go ahead and look at this, and again try to go ahead and knock it out for yourself if you haven't been able to. All right, hopefully this makes sense on functions, and then I'll go ahead and give you the other videos to watch for the PowerShell commands.